Okay.
Oh, they're probably across the street. You want to do a roll call?
Yeah.
Or
You ready to call it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We're going to call the meeting to order for the October 18th Airport Commission meeting. On the roll, Mr. Aker,
Here.
Mr. Amadan, Mr. Gobb,
Here.
Mr. McIntyre, or Miss McIntyre. Sorry.
Here.
Mr. Smith,
Here.
Councilman Rohr,
Here.
Chairman Lewis.
Here. And how about a motion to excuse Charlton Hamadan?
So moved.
I'll second.
Call the roll. Mr. Aker,
Yes.
Mr. Gobb,
Yes.
Miss McIntyre,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Councilman Rohr,
Yes.
Chairman Lewis.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now we've got to discuss the election of officers. I'm pretty sure Walt wants to be involved.
Well, I'm certainly willing to vote.
I second that.
That I can vote?
No, I'll vote as well.
Would anyone like to, correct me if I'm wrong on this procedure, Elaine, but would anyone like to volunteer to be one of the officers?
I mean, it's not a huge role.
No. And it really should be spread around a little bit.
Yep.
Janie?
I'll volunteer to do vice chairperson, but not chair.
Nobody else?
I nominate you for chair.
I got nominated every single time.
Oh, I was chair just a couple of years ago, so my
Were you?
turn's up.
All right.
I don't believe that's correct.
All right. Do we need to vote on it, I think?
Well, yes, so I guess we can take a nomination for chair and you can decline it.
I can decline it?
You can decline it. Because somebody's going to be chair by the end of this
And I
meeting.
think she becomes the chair.
Yeah, she's already volunteered for vice, so if I
No,
decline,
that's not
she's in.
fair.
Well, you could put Charlton as chair.
Since he's not here.
Janie will have to run it.
Let's do that. I nominate Charlton. I'll teach him not to come.
I'll second it.
Call the roll?
All right. Mr. Aker,
Yes.
Mr. Gobb,
Yes.
Miss McIntyre,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Councilman Rohr,
Yes.
Mr. Lewis.
Yes. This is what happened to me, by the way.
I'm pretty sure that is correct. So who nominated? I'm sorry. That was you?
Kyle did.
Kyle did?
Kyle did not.
And who seconded?
I think.
I second.
Walt did, yeah.
Well, he did do acting chair at the last.
Yeah, so he
meeting
does
and
have
did
some
a very-
experience,
he
and
did a
I'm
great
sure
job.
he did a good job.
I think it'd be great.
I can't
Okay.
think of anyone better.
So, do we have a nomination for vice chair?
We have a volunteer. That would be Janie.
So we just need a nomination.
You nominate Jamie?
Yep.
Oh, I'd second that too.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Ramadan. Oops,
He's-
I'm all over
he's
the
gone.
place today.
He's abstaining.
Mr. Gobb,
Yes.
Miss McIntyre,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Councilman Rohr,
Yes.
and Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
All right,
So at this point, does Janie take over this?
correct.
Oh, that was mean. I'm fine. I'm fine.
you want to say?
No, I'm good right here. All right then. We need an approval. We need an approval for the Airport Commission meeting held July 19th. Is that correct?
Correct.
As recorded and transcribed?
I'll move we approve that, the minutes from July 19th. Second.
I'll second.
Call the roll.
Call roll.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Mr. Gobb?
Yes.
I got everyone's names all moved around, so I'm trying to. Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Councilman Rohr?
Abstain.
And Vice Chairwoman McIntyre.
Yes. All right, next on the agenda is public comments. I see we have several in the audience this evening. Nice to have you with us. Any comments? Whatever you'd like to say.
Anything that's not on the agenda.
No, I would like to comment on things that are on the agenda when they come up.
Anyone else have anything to add at this time? Okay. Next is an update on the aircraft maintenance service RFP process and selection.
That'll be staff, and I'll take that,
Okay.
Madam Vice Chair. I wanted to report that we've finished the process, and we've actually contacted we had two proposers. We've evaluated them and scored them and notified both of the rankings of those scores. First, I just want to take a second just to introduce who was part of it. We set up a review committee that involved several entities. John Chotmer's here tonight. He's there representing airport tenant. Mike Spencer was also part of that review committee representing airport tenants. Greg Heaton is our consultant on several airport projects now from Crawford, Murphy, and Tilly, and he was representing our consultants on that review committee. Janie was also representing this commission, was able to review the written submissions and provide comments, although she was unable to make the interviews. And then Joe Bullis from staff and myself rounded out the committee. I don't think I forgot anybody. Jackie Walker's assistant city manager, representing the city manager's office. So that was the committee. So we had a pretty broad group, a lot, good representation from the airport and the airport needs and aircraft owners, representation from the city, and then outside representation. So we were really pleased with that. And we got a lot of good comments. In the end, we had a proposal from Shamrock Air Services and a proposal from Spirit Aeronautics, and they were really different approaches to the RFP, and the RFP specifically was, we've shared it with all of you, again, was to provide the best GA maintenance to our existing tenants and those other folks from around the central area that like to use our airport for services. So in the end, the top ranked RFP was Shamrock Air Services, and with Spirit Aeronautics coming in second. So at this point in the process, we've notified both, and we would begin to go into contract negotiations with Shamrock and see that we can get a successful lease negotiation. And per the RFP, that'd be for a 5-year period, renewable for an additional 5-year period, assuming that everything, they're meeting all the marks in the lease, and we continue as an airport commission and community to be happy with the services. So that's the nutshell version of where we are right now. I can provide additional comment if you're interested in kind of what we saw with each of the two, if you're interested, or we could just move on through the contract negotiations. But I think the team, after interviews, we met, and I want to say for those who were there in that discussions, I say we were pretty unanimous in our decision. I see John shaking his head too. He had a lot of good comment. Mike Spencer's not here, but I think we're in a strong agreement of our ranking. John.
Spirit doesn't offer maintenance other than on the electronics that I'm aware of. Did they come forward with some proposal to?
Part of the proposal did include the ability to do some GA maintenance on there, but as one of the strong things that we recognized as a review committee that wasn't necessarily their forte. While they're an expert in the field of avionics, it looked like they were going to try to build a GA maintenance asset and be able to provide that. They were very clear their end goal was to be able to relocate much of their business here in Delaware, which would be great to have an organization like that here. But it wasn't necessarily to be here just to provide top-level GA maintenance for us. It was more of a business decision.
They have had an ulterior motive, which I understand, and you're right, it would be great to have them on field. Did anybody talk to them or consider whether or not Spirit could take the lead and subcontract the maintenance out to Shamrock?
We had just similar discussions. We were a little, we didn't want to ask that specifically because, Shamrock was also proposing. So we didn't want to make it look like, well, if we give it to Spirit, we can still keep Shamrock here. It wouldn't really be fair to Shamrock. We wanted it to stand on its own laurels. But we had similar discussion as if, well, what if you weren't awarded, but would you still be here? Would you still be able to build? We tested out a number of different ways. And frankly, the gentleman representing Rick Oakes, I think some of you may know him, just finally came out and said, look, it's a little self-serving why I'm submitting. That's because I really would like to be here in Delaware. And this was an opportunity to get the foot in the door. And I think, again, we were fairly confident that it's not their forte necessarily. And although he has some certified folks on his staff, it was our feeling that he wasn't servicing, a dozen or 2 dozen small aircraft through GA services a week. Certainly in the avionics, yes, but not in the types of things that when we reached out to our airport community, the kind of interest we wanted to see there. I will say also that regarding Shamrock, he had, gosh, Joe, I don't know if it was 20 or 30 support letters from both local folks in our field, as well as folks from Central Ohio community that were very supportive of his abilities, his technical abilities. I'm speaking of Shane Young, of course, and what he provides to them in the Central Ohio community. So that actually weighed a lot that we had that type of support. So in the end, we were trying to score on who would provide the best, maintain and provide the best quality and the best pricing for general aircraft services here for Delaware. And Shamrock did come out on top. It wasn't that Spirit offered, what Spirit offered would be great for Delaware, but it didn't specifically address what this RFP process was about. And that's really to continue to maintain good quality aircraft maintenance service and inspection service right here in Delaware. So that's where we landed. And again, I think we were pretty unanimous. If I could ask John or Joe for additional input if you want to hear from someone other than myself. But I think we made the right selection in this, and we went through a very open process, and we really made sure we involved a lot of broad users of our airport, both plane owners, business owners, and outside third-party folks that really had no skin in either game, to make sure that that we were being very fair to both.
But it still sounds like it's got to be negotiated as
Yep.
far as the contract goes, or the term of the lease. Well, not the term of the lease maybe, but.
That's correct. We pursued this as a quality-based selection process to make sure we get the best entity on board, and then make sure we can negotiate a lease. Our lease will basically be the same lease, but there's some certain things in there we're updating, and to make sure that we're any loopholes that were in there before we're closing. Our goal ultimately is to always improve the airport ourselves, our infrastructure, our facilities, but also to make sure who signs that lease has that in mind too, that their front stage representative of DLZ having a hangar right there where everyone comes and lands right in front of the fuel. So we want to make sure that it looks professional, that it appears professional, and that there's a professional attitude going forth from that. So we're making sure our lease is going to be representative of that too. And if we have to provide some support in order to get that, then I think as a city, we're committed to doing that, to make sure everyone on our field in a service representing the city really represents it very, very well. Any other questions regarding?
No, I've got a comment.
Yeah.
I would like to thank the selection committee for the hard work they did. Not only did they, I think in my estimate, pick the right one, but they pick a veteran-owned company. And as I understand it, John Schotmeyer, we already have an avionics facility in your hangar already. So as opposed to duplication of effort there, I think having another avionics shop and no real maintenance for general aircraft
Mhm.
was the deciding issue there.
I'll second that.
They vote for veterans.
Yeah, just in fair to Spirit is veteran-owned also, and 15 of their 20 employees are veterans also. So they're, good American-made veteran company as well.
There is also another maintenance facility on the field.
Correct.
In
Right.
Dr. Schottmer's hangar.
And we should admit, our lease terms they're non-exclusive. So if someone showed up next week and wanted to build 20,000 square foot maintenance hangar and business, it's something we'd have to discuss. Our next topic, we're going to talk a little bit about strategic planning. That's one of the things we want to talk about is how we may go about doing those things, because obviously Shamrock's investing and they don't necessarily want someone to come in and just take all the business, but we also don't want to prohibit growth in the airport. So that'll be one of the strategies we'll talk about in the next item. But John, as airport representative, I don't know if you want to add anything regarding our process.
I thought the process was a good process. It was fair. Both sides got their say, and they scored appropriately, and I think the right decision was made.
Okay. Yeah, and I want to thank John personally here and Greg for being part of that too, and Janie as well. It did take a little bit of work on their side, but I agree, Chris, that I think we got the right person there. So what we've said is within the next 2 weeks, we'll enter the lease negotiations with Shamrock, and with our goal is to have a lease in place buttoned up for the end of year. And they have both been notified of the results. So at this point, we're free as a city and committee to be able to talk openly regarding the results to either individual.
Well, I appreciate you considering, having no gap in the coverage, so to speak. I know that that Jetstream's hangar has the maintenance as well, but I don't think they could keep up with everything.
Right.
It would have been a real blow to numerous people to not have somebody there to work on their aircraft.
Absolutely. Okay.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, we will move on then to item number 6, which is to update the strategic planning process.
That's me also.
Okay.
So we just talked a little bit about strategic business planning. Again, I just want to introduce Greg Heaton from Crawford Murphy and Tilley. In fact, I'm actually asking him to come up front here to talk a little bit. But we have signed a contract earlier this year to look at some strategic business planning for the airport. A lot of the components of that we can talk about tonight, we put aside because our priority was obviously making sure that we continue to provide maintenance, and Greg was really helpful in helping us to put the RFP together, be part of the panel, and so we appreciate that with his help on that. So now we're ready to move into the next part, or which is really the meat of their contract, which is looking at certain things at DLZ for strategic planning. We're talking about things like, do we try to attract as an entity more jet hangars? Do we expand our T hangars because we're 100% full and have waiting list? Do we bring new services there that we don't currently have? Are there services that are extraneous we don't need? What are the trends in the aircraft industry? Well, one of the reasons we hired a company like CMT is because they have a national presence and are tied into the trends that happen, not just locally, although they've done a lot of work in Ohio, Central Ohio, but also nationally. And as a city, we thought that's the appropriate person to bring in, because we want to make sure if they're tied into what the trends are out there, we want to be able to maybe adopt some of those trends, or at least have the opportunity to understand them and bring that information back to the city and to this committee and say, this is what we're proposing for some business planning elements or some goals. And I should say this is completely separate from our infrastructure plan with that we do through CHA, which says we just finished an 800-foot runway and we're going to do a ramp B expansion someday. We're not talking about just the infrastructure components. We're talking about, as an airport operation, where does it make sense to stress? What should we be doing to make our aircraft, one, sustainable, and two, to grow and become actually a little bit more profitable than where we are right now. So I want an opportunity just for Greg to introduce himself, and for you to be able, if you want some interaction with him, and ask him a little bit about. I think I included The important part of his contract, which has the scope of some of the scope services, you've had the opportunity to look at that. If you have any specific questions on any of them, we can go through those. But the majority of the contract was just this long city contract that was just way too long, in my opinion, for a fairly simple process. But the scope elements are right, and I'm really excited to start. We're just planning right now about kicking this thing off and starting some of our stakeholder work, of which, again, this committee will be part of that in terms of gathering information. Also, we've had some private, Mr. McCarrow out here has already been in contact with me and said he would like to provide input regarding things at the airport. So we want to make sure this is broad enough that we can gain all of our user groups again, and make sure that if we're going to come up with a business plan and some strategies, it involves those who are absolutely invested in our airport. So that's what our intention is, and hopefully Greg and their subconsultant will be able to pull that off for us. So Greg, I'll let you talk if you would.
Sure, thank you, Bill. And thank you, Commissioner. It's a delight to be here. I really feel like I could come, and we're excited to be part of this with you moving forward. We've been anxious to sort of get jumped in there, but of course, to that issue of getting the maintenance issue resolved so that we're not big gap, hopefully for the users was pretty important to be able to make that clear. So we're glad to help get that done and behind and underway before we launch into the strategic business plan. As Bill mentioned, I'm Greg Eaton. I lead our Ohio practice for craft work utility. Actually oversee aviation for Ohio and Indiana. Our firm does do work, as Bill mentioned, nationally. We've been doing airports and aviation work for 70 years. Probably had 70 plus clients like you that we serve on a retainer ongoing. Some of them go all the way back to 1946. And we work, but from the largest to the smallest. We do work in Chicago O'Hare, and with probably 70–80% of our clients are GA airports, just like yourselves. And that's by design for us. I mean, it's occasionally fun to work for the O'Hares, but we don't. I'm tired of saying how high when they say jump. So, so anyway, I've been involved with aviation for over 30 years. Almost the vast majority of that occurs in the Midwest for us, and just really very excited to help maximize or optimize, if you will, what you do, or be strategic moving forward, how to make the airport be, again, as best as possible, that economic connector or engine, if you'd rather use that word, for the community. We've got an enormous amount of potential, and that takes all of those pieces together, as well as, and part of our scope is to review the leases, rates, and chargings, things that are the business side of the house that make the best climate possible. Because at the end of the day, the users or the businesses that are there are private folks, and you've got a great climate that makes it advantageous for them to be there and choose it. In fact, not to let it out, but clearly Spirit's interest in Doe is not only just a great place to live and hang out, the business climate is better. They pay fees and charges that they feel are a little excessive at John Glenn International, and can't argue that. You understand why John Glenn has to have high rates and fees. They got a lot of infrastructure to take care of, but if we create a climate that makes it attractive for businesses like that or others to make their home here, that hopefully makes a better climate for our aviation users, but as well brings more business to the area. So that'll be a primary focus of our effort with Bill and you all as we move forward. So we're interested to get started. And I'm happy to take any and all questions, but Bill didn't tell me how to make a presentation, so I'm prepared all.
I do have one. As you were going through this process and you went to our airport, you talked to numerous people, were there anything that you said, aha, we can work on that?
As a little bit of an outsider, I've flown up the field some. Some of the difficulties that led to this, the RP were interesting. I mean, it was sort of fun to move through the process. The group was very good to not try to cloud or shade it one way or the other. But that's the sort of scenario that makes you go, why? Why is that the case? I mean, everybody wants to be there. They want the business to thrive. They want to serve users. So why do we get that? So that was one where it was fun to sort of explore that out and explore with the two candidates, as well as then in follow-up to be able to ask and to Bill's comment earlier, where he pointed out, how can we help? How can the city, how can the airport help support, whether it's the maintenance operator or town's operation, wherever? What can we do? Their success makes the airport succeed. In all my years, And I sat with many groups, probably some maybe not as experienced as yours, and have to remind them that a good FBO or a good maintenance provider with the right attitude and the right service mindset is worth their weight in gold at a general aviation airport these days. And you'd be surprised. I could sit here for hours and tell you stories of places that don't think of them that way. And it just does me. Wait till they're gone, and you find out how hard it is to have a vibrant, active airport without those resources. So excited to try to make sure that we really dial in the business aspects, again, anywhere from our leases to our rates and charges that make it successful for those folks.
So is there an airport that you work with or that you have worked with that reminds you a lot of Delaware? And if there is, where are they in this process? What have they done?
Well, if you don't mind, did you take, because it's a little hard to get me going like that. I'll tell you, way back when I was younger, whippersnapper, one of the most successful stories we've had the pleasure. If any of you are familiar with DuPage Airport, Chicago, Illinois, most of all here.
Yeah.
Many years ago, I'm younger, that was a little east-west strip. It was about 4,000 feet long, had a railroad to move it to the south, and sort of hand-in communities on each end of the runway. And frankly, we weren't very happy that it was there and operating. And as soon as a couple men who were like you, that was sort of the commission at the time, one said, we little over standing outside, he walked down and goes, you see that? Of course, you look down and, gosh, it was a half mile away to Fermilab nuclear testing facility. You know, we're going to buy all that land between here and there. We'll relaunch this runway. We'll have a couple of parallel runways. It had a vision. And I remember as a young guy going, what are you talking about? Are you kidding me? How much that line would cost? And there's a railroad between us and that. And for any of you who moved a rail line, you know.
Can't be done.
It's easier to really displace God with this. They're immensely powerful. Anyway, today, if any of you are familiar with DuPage Airport, it has parallel runways. The longest is 7,000 feet. Shorter one is 5, and I think we're in the process. We've served them for now, pushing probably 3.5 decades. It taught me at a young age how difficult it is to have people with vision. And I can remember, and of course, the guy that was sort of the lead of the commission was the sheriff. He was a retired sheriff. He was not an aviation guy, but we like to fly. He goes, well, let me tell you something. The growth that will happen around the metropolitan area, we can either plan and get ready for it, or we just let it run over us. But it's going to happen. The growth will occur. And let's be, now, I'm not suggesting that Delaware wants to aspire and have those things, but we moved the railroad. We moved a number of things. We have a high pressure gas pipeline that runs right up the middle of the airfield. It passes between the runways and taxiways. That was one piece we did not choose to move. I got sent off on the task. I spent a good 3 months of my life trying to convince FAA that we could leave the railroad in the middle of the airport. We put gates and we let the control tower operate the gates. We were not successful. I always remember it was one of my first failures with the FAA. Well, boy, we really gave it our best shot. It's as creative as I thought I could get.
That would have been innovative.
But it's an amazing facility. It does well economically, obviously, but more importantly, it's a huge economic connector or engine in their area with the Fortune 50 type companies that fly out there with the heavy iron. Their desire, of course, for those of you who are, you know, their 7,000 foot runway is longer than Midway. So there's virtually nothing that can't come in and out of there if they desire. And then once again, pre-deregulation, maybe they could have commercial service. I'm not suggesting this. All these go to, they had a vision and they created the thing. And it may provide influence. So everywhere I work today, in fact, it's one of the roles. I have a number of staff. We do a lot of projects like you do a CHA for many folks, and I have staff of folks that are engineers. My particular background, addition to engineer came up through planning, but is really trying to sit with folks like yourself. And sometimes I say you got to push back from the table a little bit and look, but it's hard for many people to look beyond the next 2 or 3 years. What could it be, and where is it? You know, where might it head? And we won't get it quite right. If I had a crystal ball, I'd be on the beach somewhere and be that. But we can plan. We can plan and set forth things that give us the best shot. And I think obviously Delaware, we're sitting here in some of the best possible conditions for that. So let's maximize it.
So are you looking for somebody to tell you this is the direction we want to go, or are you going to tell us this is the direction you should go?
I'm not going to tell you the direction you should go, but I'm going to tease and poke and prod and ask questions, and I will, encourage to think about things. But at the end of the day, you all, the commission, the city of Delaware owns the airport, and so there are times folks that say to me, "No, we just want to be." Case in point, I was just with some folks last night. We just want to be a sleepy country little airport. And after months and months of gently trying to go on, I think there's some more potential. But that's what.
Well, that's kind of what or at least my question has been for some years now. What do we want to be when we grow up? Because we talk about having Gulfstreams landing every half hour, but then we say, but oh man, that's a lot of noise. We don't know what the neighbors will think, and we say, well, gee, it'd be great to have a lot more Cessnas and Bonanzas, but they don't buy any jet fuel.
And it's a delicate balance. Again, we work with many that are what I would call your urban, really rural airport. You have that potential. It is tough. We've worked with a lot where building good community involvement, trying to convince I believe there'll always be that fight of people who don't fully understand and think that they're toys for boys, that kind of thing. But more and more, and I wear an alternate hat at times with the Ohio Aviation Association. It's a group we've tried to transform myself and some others going back a few years to help tell that story, because the truth is it's not. It used to be in the old days, perhaps, but I don't know how many can fly around and get those $300 ambulances, but they're business tools. And over the many years, I've had to do a lot of talking to folks to understand it. Yeah, if you don't use it, you do not see it. Or your employer does, and just have to take those challenges on. So,
John, I'll mention too, one of the first tasks we're just starting to coordinate is to address just what you're asking is, much like the RFP process, we're assembling stakeholders to provide input. And it could be anything from this is what we think the airport should be to this is what we don't want it to be. And just to give you a sampling, we're going to, again, lean heavily on some of our, what we call our superintendents, Jetstream, Airspace Place, because they represent so many different use groups there. To involve them, our local EA chapter. We want to make sure they're represented in this process. Flight school. So when I say represented, in this case, we're going to be, taking time to interview these folks and ask opinions. What do you want to see? What are problems you see with the airport? What are the pros and cons you see there? Try to just really assemble a lot of common. And then we want to make sure we have a probably social media based or web based portal for just any other user who wants to make sure they can submit their comments. Maybe we do that through SurveyMonkey or something like that and send it out to every tenant in there to have the opportunity to get as much more feedback we get. Just like Greg said, he could write a business plan, but may not mesh with what we want. The more feedback we get, we can start understanding what are the trends, what are the ones that mesh up with what we think our tenants and our owners and our users want. And kind of form, so it's kind of an iterative process that way. So it's a pretty wide net we want to cast up front to make sure it's very inclusive to a lot of different types of users. And then we'll start assembling, we'll start drilling down on specifically our lease policies and things like that to make sure that we're suggesting these are some good directions. And then probably bring back a draft version of that to this committee and say, here's where we are, and have some dialogue with that and talk about that. And I think because we only meet quarterly, we'll probably have information we'll be shipping to the committee in the meantime so you can really kind of consume that and think about it and provide some direction back, being major stakeholders in the process. And to help, I look at this as somewhat this plus the city staff as the steering element of this project to make sure it's going in the right direction so we don't get off too far on a tangent. But in the end, we should have broad-based feedback, and we'll be able to publish all those comments as part of this process and to move forward. We don't want it to take forever, but we're also not O'Hare. We're not trying to figure out how to survive for 20 years. But just like you said, what is the vision? What do we think the aircraft community wants for Delaware? And then team it up with the expertise that Greg can bring, and, what do we think is feasible? What's manageable, and come up with that policy.
Bill, what thoughts do you have around how could you, reach out and engage with either the commercial base or the general public who don't use it now as part of, of this process? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Well, we have several outlets locally. We do a lot of kind of survey work just through our local our Facebook, and we use the Nextdoor site just as a general way to get into the public. And you'd be surprised, public has input on things like the airport. Their input might just be, we love the tri-motor. I remember we had a fly-in years ago. Bring back more of that. And that's valuable public input just because they say, hey, we do know the airport and it does serve some benefit. But anyways, those are our resources right now. We'll put stuff certainly on our website and regarding the information. It's hard to, even with social media, it's hard to get to everybody. But we can make a fairly concerted effort. Kevin has a very detailed list of all the current users, and we can also invite folks outside of that user group to participate as well. We can even put links to click on our airport webpage if someone's just cruising through and hits that, as well as our city webpage to say, if you want some input in this, we want to hear from you. So it's a good question, but I think at least these days with media, we can get a little bit broader, even the non-users.
What kind of time frame are you thinking of at this point?
Well, our schedule's completely blown at this point from what we talked about. Greg and I actually, it'd be premature for me to say exactly. Unfortunately,
Your
Yeah.
best guess?
yeah, because we are coming up on, it's very difficult halfway through November through January 1st to schedule a lot of things. But I think I'm pretty confident that we'll start our interview process in November with key user groups, and also try to get the survey information out for the end of the year. I like to think maybe by the end of January, we may have a lot of that pulled together. And that gives us a good solid 3 months to get a lot of information in there. At the same time, there are other tasks that Greg will be working on us too, in terms of, he's already starting to review some agreements and things we have in place. So there'll be parallel work going on. But in terms of a deliverable, we're probably looking at maybe late first quarter, I think. And I'm just speculating. Again, I haven't had a chance to really talk about this with Greg. Yep. Yep. With
Our fee to us.
about a 3-month process.
3 to 4 month process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Bill. And Greg. All right, moving on to number 7, the 5-year CIP.
That's me.
That's you again?
See the trend
Are
here.
you over there going to do anything tonight?
We're doing fine. We're learning a lot.
So every year we go through as a city our 5-year CIP planning process. The airport fund is part of that, and we look at all the projects. We have our ACIP that has a whole slew of things we'd like to do at the airport over the next 10 years. Unfortunately, we don't have the funds for all those things. We have to pare that down to a 5-year, and we look at the projects in that and see how it stacks up to available funds locally and what kind of grant funds we can get. So what I want to do, I think in your packet you have copies of the 5-year CIP, but I just want to kind of go over really quick the couple projects that are in that you can expect to see the next 5 years. Probably one of the most important ones is the T-hanger paving between the T-hangers. Some of that pavement now is when we move those T-hangers in, I'll say 92 or 93. That pavement's there pretty old. And that's the ones closest to where the fuel farm is. So we have that broken into over 5 years, 3 phases to be able to pave all the T-hanger pavement from east and moving to the west, broken down into phases. So that's one of the most important. We did not receive state funding for that. We were hopeful. Joe was real helpful, and Kevin in putting together an application, but that's not a project that was supported by the state at this point. So, but we are showing general fund dollars in order to be able to move forward. Or I'm sorry, we are showing entitlement dollars through FAA, because that is somewhat discretionary. And that's probably our priority need right now, is to make sure that pavement stays in good shape. If you drive our airport, we've got some of the best pavements now in small airports around, that we've been able to take care of virtually all of our main flight surfaces. So taking care of the T-hangar pavement is something we do recognize needs to be completed. We've had complaints about it, and so you'll see a project in 19, a project in 21, and a project in 2023 in 3 phases to start taking care of that pavement. The next project is the Apron B rehabilitation, which again is the next probably most needed piece of pavement. That's the big piece of pavement out from John's Hangar. Again, it's an older piece of pavement, and it needs to be worked on as well.
Excuse me, that's east of the Shamrock building?
In between Shamrock and Jetstream.
Correct.
Yep.
Thank you.
Has our tie downs on it, and
Yes.
really just the ramp area out there. So we're showing that as a 2020 project. And then Apron A expansion, which would go from really where the heel pad landing is out east into the field. That project got pushed out of the 5-year CIP. That project primarily was established in order to allow some kind of growth on the airport, that we would need to have additional tie down space bumped out further east than the current apron allows, so we could utilize more of that existing apron area, perhaps it's for more jet aircraft overnighting or staging for fuel, or to move existing tie downs from Apron B over to Apron A to allow businesses to grow north of where Jetstream is or opposite of where Jetstream is in the green space around that apron. So right now that's our target area, to try to bring some new large business into the airport. That would require having to relocate some of the services that are provided there now, specifically tie downs to a new area in the airport.
So in other words, if a new hangar were to go in, or
Correct.
it would
eliminate
because
tie
I know
downs.
when we talked to Spirit
Yes.
18 months ago, it was going to go farther west of the T hangars.
Right. And that project now, I mean, that was, honestly, it was maybe pie in the sky attempt from Spirit to build a very large facility. What we're looking at now is people are interested in building 15,000 square feet, maybe 20,000 square feet of hangar space. So we have the ability to build 2 more hangars similar to what John has, one just north of his and one opposite side of that pavement. So it'll allow us to have, again, with business planning, there may be an entity that want to come in and build a hangar. That's the quick place to get them in, but it does in fact mean we lose tie down space right there. So Apron A expansion was part of the overall ACIP, that, hey, if you're going to expand the airport, you need to expand your main apron areas also, and Apron A is the logical next expansion area. So that's pushed out beyond 2023. Again, keep in mind with that when it comes to the airport, and because 95% of our airport is built by state and federal funds, that things can change. Availability of funds can change. Project support from those entities may become of more interest depending upon what type of project it is. So it's very fluid, but for what we have to do as a city, we have to have a balanced 5-year CIP. So I'm just giving you the snapshot right now of what that is. Another project that is in there, we call it the corporate parking lot access driveway, and that's really adding another way into the airport that primarily provides an access point and parking behind where Jetstream is right now, and another entity that could be to the north. And the goal of that project, 1, is to provide a higher level service for those entities so they actually have parking right by their hangar, and 2 is to start to eliminate having parking go across, having active traffic go across that Apron B, especially if we were to get another entity there, whether it's jet or something else. Mixing vehicle traffic and mixing aircraft traffic is obviously frowned upon by FAA, but
Would
as
that
well
mean
as us.
another driveway off of Pittsburgh Drive?
It'd be where I think it's where the, yeah, yeah.
The entrance they use
Yeah.
for Pancake Breakfast.
It would upgrade that to a more, official, maybe
Sure.
gate 1 of the airport right there. And then we'd be able to provide parking to these entities and, higher level of service there. So we're showing in 2021, trying to get that driveway, a paved driveway started and constructed down as far as at least the Jetstream hangar. And there's the TIF revenues we have coming to the airport. Looks like they'll be able to cover that project. So we may actually start some design work in late 19 and 20 to be in a position to actually get that in. If something were to happen north side of Jetstream, it may, again, it may say we should accelerate that project. So those are the large projects that are in the CIP right now. And you know, this is, of course, is part of the overall appropriations budget work that we're getting ready to go in. All these projects will roll into that. I don't see any reason why any of these would fall back out in the next 4 to 6 weeks. Yes, Tim.
One quick question, and this is just maybe my, not knowing this very well yet. But when I read a spreadsheet like this, one thing that jumped out at me was the needs verified, the 450,000, over the 3 years. Has that been verified, or is there a plan B if it's not verified? Says the
Oh, yes.
the carryover says
Yes.
Needs verified.
That's a note from our finance director.
Okay.
Just to, he's the one that's, checking everything out, and
Okay.
that's a personal note he has in there. He wants to make sure that, yeah, we are in fact getting the entitlement dollars. Our consultant, CHA, as we've already had, in fact, we got our FAA meeting coming up, I think, next month, Joe. Where we'll sit down and talk about those exact things, and we'll get that forecast, not only talk about these, but get that reassurance, hey, we are going to continue to get our entitlement dollars every year. And so that's the needs verified portion right there. And for any reason, should that formula change, then we'd have to make changes to this.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions on the CIP? I think there's also some sheets in it just generally described. These are more for the general public who don't know the airport. You all know all what we're talking about when we say aprons and where they are. So if you don't have any questions, that's all I have.
I do have one.
Sure.
I guess you'd call it a question. I know this is a bit of a hot potato, but since we brought up the conversation of potential new hangars and so on and so forth, I know one bone of contention to some new hangars coming in at any rate has been the length and the term of the lease and the terms of the leases. Because as I've understood it, and the ones that I've gotten my eyes on have shown a 25 or a 30-year lease, after which everything potentially could be given to the city or would be given to the city. Is that something that Greg is going to look at and give some recommendations to?
Greg is looking at those things now, as a matter of fact. Absolutely. Yep.
I mean, one thought, one conversation that I had is if at the end of the term, the 25 or 30 years or whatever it is, if the city does not want to renew that for some reason, then whatever structure's there perhaps should be purchased from whoever owns it at, some value at that time through an appraisal or something like that.
Those are excellent comments, and that's exactly why we brought on an expert who knows these trends nationally. That what are the leasing arrangements? Because obviously, people investing that much money need to get a payback on that investment, and then they need to make money off of that as well. They don't, otherwise, why do this?
Because it makes a potential sale pretty much worthless,
right?
If you get towards the middle of that term, perhaps.
And that's where we're internally recognizing that. To sign a long-term lease to think that entity might actually be here for 50 or 75 years, it's probably foolish. So we're
Probably
thinking
is or is not
there's got to be probably is foolish. So there probably needs to be provision in there to cover alternate situations that are likely going to be experienced sometime. It may be before the payback comes on that capital investment, and maybe shortly after or at that time. But we got to look at that and make sure that we can structure those that are beneficial still to the city and the airport growth, but also don't become a disadvantage to the person who's putting out all that capital.
Yeah, because it's tough to get people to just sink their money in it if they don't think they can get a profit on it or get their money back at some point.
It's a very good point. It's one of our top priorities in this whole business planning is to look at the leasing arrangements.
Thank you.
Anything else for Bill, who's going to lose his voice here before long? Okay, nothing else. We'll move on to number 8. which is the minimum operating standards and rules and regulations.
And I'm just going to introduce this, and then maybe Kevin and Joe, if they have, Kevin and Joe have been involved in the airport for so long. If you have some specific questions, the point of this is it goes hand in glove with our business planning, is that it's time to look at our rules and regulations and our operating standards and make sure, one, that everything in there is still applicable at the airport. Two, there may be some additions. There may be changes based on FAA regulations that have changed. And then just the whole spirit of what do we think about do we think those things we have some flexibility on, are they too tight, are they too loose? I mean, this is how we maintain control when control is needed at the airport. And so, Kevin and Joe are the day-to-day managers of those things and deal with most of the issues. But we wanted to provide, to start with, this committee the opportunity. I think we have to provide you a new document, because I think you may be missing some pages in what were sent, and we'll try to get those resent out. But to have you have the very first shot at going through these and saying, I've always had a problem with this, or I don't think this is strong enough, to look at it that way, and as well as our consultant look at it and say, well, FAA says this now, and you need to be sharp in this area right here. But we want to make sure this, starting with the committee, with the commission, that you have the opportunity to go through these carefully and to submit comments on those areas you think need to be addressed.
Send them back to you via email or wait till the next meeting?
Email probably be better
Yep.
than I can wait 3 months. For the next meeting, I would say probably the email be.
Yeah, why don't we'll send them back out. I'll make sure all the pages are there, and we can I'm fine with Joe being the contact to receive all those comments. That's fine.
You'll send out a PDF file or something?
Lane, is that what form we'll send it out in?
Does that work? Do you want a paper copy?
Something that we could edit would be nice, that we could put in, I don't know, somehow, I can't edit PDFs. I'm not that smart.
Word copy can be
Yeah,
converted.
Word, if you have it in Word, maybe that'd be good. Then we could redline it.
Have to look and see if you have it in Word. When you convert it to Word, it doesn't always convert
Right.
properly.
We can always just print it and jot notes in the side and
But if you
rescan it too.
want it printed out, I can print it out right now and start printing it before the end of the meeting.
If your preference is to be able to, do it online, do it digitally, because you can highlight areas and underline areas and insert notes in areas, I mean, that's fine with us. We can work with a format that you can do that in.
Is this pretty much it? I mean, it's not 1,000
There are a
pages.
few pages
Page
that,
based on what you
that-
want to scan.
when it's scanned, it must have doubled up. The pages
Oh.
went
5,
through
6,
and,
9, 12.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
trying to read through
and
it.
unfortunately, I didn't,
Catch it
Mr.
till
Smith
today.
had emailed me, about an
Just
hour
tonight.
before the meeting.
Yeah, I didn't give her too much
and so-
notice on that one.
So,
Sorry about that.
Yeah, everything's
That
shown
is
here in
my-
PDF.
So this one's missing a few pages.
Yes.
Okay.
Why don't you just email it out in a PDF? We'll print it and just jot some notes along the side and scan
That's
it
fine.
back to you.
Yeah.
Get sent directly to you right
Yep,
now.
or you can just send an email with all your notes pertaining to certain sections, that's fine. The important thing is getting your comments, so we really want to hear from the commission to start with.
How soon do you want those back?
I mean, is a couple weeks enough time from when we send them out?
I think so.
It's fine.
Because you may want to reach out to some of the airport constituency on some of them and say, what do you think about this? And again, it's the more information we get back, the more comments, the better. We will contrast them to updates in FAA policy in the airport about things we should be and shouldn't be allowing. And
Anything in particular that's changed that we know of that needs to be addressed or you want addressed?
Kevin?
I mean, currently now, I'm kind of in the same boat everybody is as far as reviewing them. Jill and I have gone over them a couple times, but there's nothing that jumps out at me.
I think probably one of the biggest ones, one of the biggest questions we get is use of hangars. And some of the more recent FAA, I want to say, guidance talks a lot about what the intent of their support of airports are and what hangars should and shouldn't be used for. It doesn't really speak in terms of absolutes and what our guidelines, once they're a guideline, I mean, policy, it's an absolute. So we follow what's written And so we want to discover a little bit from FAA, where's the leniency allowed, where shouldn't it be allowed? And
That is one thing, since we're talking about it, because I've always felt like as long as it's a primary aviation use, if you park your car in there while you're gone too,
Right,
or something, that should be fine. Or if you've got a motorcycle that you keep in there, even during the summer, that you ride occasionally. If it's got an airplane in there, I've always been under the impression that meets the FAA's requirements, but there's also been some disagreement with that.
right. And that's one of the areas I think we want to look into. Which is why I brought that up, because that is one of the bone of contentions, especially for the private ownership hangars. There's even more of a feeling of I'm entitled to use it the way I want to use it. When the FAA comes down to it but we're putting 90% of all your projects, it's federal dollars, and we want to make sure that you're supporting aviation as strongly as possible. So I tend to agree that if there's an active operating aircraft in there, that's one of the key tests of it. But if there's not, and it's just packed with trailers and RVs and camping gear and canoes, I'm like,
We had a furniture repair shop
Yeah.
in one.
it's not really the intent of the airport to allow those things.
They even say airworthy, I believe. It goes a little bit
Yeah.
further in depth. And then part of the process too that we've been faced, John, I know you remember all this too, is liability insurance. That's pretty much through Jackie, assistant city manager. She's had some say so in the process of, we've had some people wanting to store some high dollar cars, I'll say, in there that didn't have any insurance or wouldn't produce any. So there's been that process too. It's been, a couple different scenarios that led up to all this. So
Ultimately, these are to support aviation and Delaware being the best airport possible. Our goal isn't to try to control everyone's personal habits and how they use hangars in every possible detail. But we do want to make sure we're in conformance with what FAA guidance is. And if we had open your hangar door day and the FAA went up and down the aisles, they're not going to be shocked by anything they say. They'd be like, yeah, this is meeting the intent. So we want to make sure we're in that area, but this is the time to kind of understand that and review those types of things as well.
Well, I'm guessing you're going to have two sets of standards, one for the hangars owned and operated by the city, and then another set for the condos.
We have to look at that because when these were originally written, we didn't have private condo hangars, and now we do. So that's an interesting question. The FAA information we read right now doesn't put a distinction. An airfield's an airfield, and their dollars support the airfield regardless of whether someone's got a plane in a private hangar or a public hangar. Now, I'm not saying at this point,
No, I
I can
understand.
draw conclusions, but the feeling out there is that there's a distinctive difference between an owner occupied hangar and a publicly occupied hangar. So we have to look into that.
Well, we paid $55,000 for a private hangar, and we keep a Cirrus in it, and I'm not a car guy, but if I wanted to rebuild a car or motorcycle, would that be permitted on hangar day when they want to open up? They go, yeah, there's an airplane, but it looks like the guy's restoring a vintage car. Now, if you pay 55 grand for a hangar, I don't know where that puts us in that
Right.
equation.
That's what we're putting some effort into.
Okay.
We want to make sure it's fair, fairly applied, and FAA compliant.
Right.
And I just don't think that our current rules are probably reflective of this new situation. Certainly, the private hangar is fairly new to Delaware Airport, and we don't, we're still trying to, maybe it's a bit of a square peg in a round hole with these rules. We want to make sure that we can acknowledge that and be able to move forward fairly.
Something else that I would love to have addressed too is through the fence.
Mm-hmm.
Because I keep hearing, oh, FAA doesn't allow it. And then I talk to AOPA, they say, well, yeah, actually they do, as long as the airport owner agrees with it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I'm not with you. Through the fence, what's that mean?
through the fence business operations.
Yeah.
And I've heard it from our consultant many a times, from Mark, that it's very frowned upon, and they do not. You're correct. There are some operations that it's allowed, but they do frown upon it highly. And just to touch base with you, Walt, a little bit on the airspace place, we had our FAA meeting, driving around in the van, Kevin and I, project manager, 3 people from the FAA. airspace place. Here comes this yellow car rolling out into a enclosed T hangar. The first thing he does is look back, turn at us, and says, "What's this?" I said, "It's leaving." That's why the trailer's there. That was the very first thing that they looked at. I mean, we weren't there, what, Kevin, probably 10 minutes driving around. FAA looked straight at us, says, "What's this?" You know, here it comes rolling out on the casters and everything else up towards the trailer, sitting right out in the middle. So, I mean, you know, we're not making this stuff up. And it's,
I understand.
and it's very, and it seems like every time that, you know, there's always one little instance or one little happening. You know, they go by, you know, and it looks, like you said, like a furniture store or somebody's living there, 2-story, you know, got their dually pulled in there in the middle of the hangar and stuff all around it, no airplane, be it private, be it ours. And it just seems that it seems to happen to us. It seems like every time we go around, everything's looking good. And, you know, there's this one bubble and that they frown upon. And there was, I think we had 3 people from the FAA there that day, driving around in the van when that occurred. That was what, last year, Kevin?
So it was a car that was pushed out on a dolly, you said?
They were on dollies. And of course the T hangar's open and, you know, it,
Was there an airplane in there?
I hope maybe pieces. There was not an airplane in there and it was stacked full. But that's, you know, that's kind of the things that we get. So on the other spectrum of things, and airworthiness is definitely a portion of it. And like I said, the insurance is another portion that, you know, we really don't have any say. So that pretty much comes from assistant city managers. So I know you guys have heard that quite a few times.
But some of the bigger hangar condos, you know, they've people have put lofts in there. They've got
Dan Bruggemans?
That's all now.
Mhm.
I got
Good.
a great handout on questions and answers to the FAA. This is very recent, and it's about all these issues. I'm happy to share it with you.
That'd be a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone will have their own interpretation, but if you read it, it's actually pretty neat.
It's probably the ones where, you know, I'm referring to as well, that, you know, again, what we have in place isn't necessarily reflective to what we could do, and what John's referring to, that we received earlier this year. It was basically a large question and answer sheet for a lot of these issues. And in some cases, it came down to, is there an operable aircraft in there primarily? The first thing there, are you using it to be able to have an operable aircraft, airworthy aircraft? If the answer is yes, then a lot of the other things came up. This is probably okay, and this is probably okay, and this is probably
Right.
okay.
You just want to discourage people from buying a hangar condo and using it for a use storage,
Exactly,
which makes perfect sense.
Right. Yeah.
A pretty big building community on the airport. There's a lot of underworthy airplanes being built.
right. And that's discussed in the question and answers too, is like you know, you're allowed to construct something, you know, experimental aircraft or
Right.
you know, in a hangar space, as long as there's an ending to that. They don't want to see someone say, well, I'm building it, and 10 years later, well, I'm building it. In the meantime, it's their private business storage center. So it's got to show some advancement to it. And again, even the questions and answers talk about that too. What's a reasonable amount of time?
Right. Okay.
What's the insurance requirement for somebody building one that's not airworthy at that time?
I'm not your insurance expert. Jackie
I'm not
is.
going there.
Yeah,
That's Jackie. That's a Jackie question.
it's a,
We do get a copy of insurance that City of Delaware's listed. It's just non in motion. The insurance doesn't have to meet the 1,100,000 coverage. There is coverage on the aircraft and the city's listed. We have, like Rich said, there's several people that are builders that have built. The city has allowed it. But the only thing they don't want is someone painting that project airplane in the hangar. Other than that, we've had people build them from boxes to flying.
If someone rents a tie down, an outside tie down from you, does that insurance requirement kick in then? Okay.
Any tie-down tenant, it's just like one that's in a hangar, has to provide proof of insurance.
So at what point does that have to kick in? If somebody stays a month on a tie down or a year? I mean, what if they come in and tie down for a month or whatever and give you the $5 or $10 a night or whatever it is? Just
I
out of
mean,
The
curiosity.
city is requiring insurance.
Yeah.
I mean, we know when we got a transient and when we got a guy that he has a campground over in the Sunbury area. He lives in Florida. He comes in for a few months, about this time of year, to close it up for the year. You know, we know he's going to be here 30, 45 days, a couple of months, and you know, he's a transient.
we're glad to provide a little more detailed information to the committee on our insurance requirements, how it works, how it kicks in. I can get that from Jackie Walker, who pretty well leads the insurance wing for the city, and explain to her the hows and whys and limits and things like that for these different situations. If it would help you out, I know it would help me. But in general, we want to see people's property insured when it's on our public property.
Anything else? Questions? When is your FAA meeting?
Not
Not scheduled yet. Actually, we just did 6 o'clock this evening. Received email that's up and coming.
There we go.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah, we've been.
They're coming here?
No, it'll be a teleconference.
Oh, okay.
But they didn't even set a full agenda, just a few things that they wanted to discuss. And like I said, it just popped up at like 5 after 6 today, so we talked to Mark Eckroth about 2 weeks ago, had a meeting with him, and knowing that this was coming down the road, we figured it'd actually be sooner, but I guess they're really running behind on meeting this year, so usually they're scheduled right now.
Probably by end of November, we'll probably have that.
Try to have them wrapped up. Actually, it used to be back in October, thing, but it's probably scheduled for the middle of November.
Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll move on to number 9, which is a report on the Tri-Motor Fly-In event.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know how many of you know or were able to attend, but in August, the 9th through the 12th, Ford Tri-Motor, the EAA, had the Ford Tri-Motor there. Bernie Ripton, the vice president, told me that they had 401 paying rides. I think they took a total of 126 rides, and we put 684 gallons of fuel on it over those 4 days. I think Sunday was the best weather day. A lot of those days they maybe weren't able to start till a couple hours into. They were going 9 to 5, when they able to start till 11 or so, and then some maybe it got bad in the afternoon. But they were real happy with the venue. Said anytime he wants to come back, let us know. In the past, it's been difficult to get them there, but it was such a good turnout. They were really happy to bring it, and like I said, was happy to come back anytime. I don't know if you saw the picture in the paper, but the plane didn't actually fit in the hangar, so they had to one wing in and spin it around. So every morning and every night, that was kind of interesting. You start and end your day by getting that delicate aircraft in and out. I'm glad I was not the tug operator. So anyway, that like I said, 401 rides, paying rides. That's pretty good. And Thursday was only about 2 or 3 hours worth of rides, because that was supposed to be the media day. The Friday, Saturday, and Sunday were the full 9 to 5 days, weather permitting, which they didn't get that in. I don't think. Maybe Sunday was the only day they got an actual 9 to 5 of rides.
Did you have many calls of complaints or anything?
Only had 2. One was just someone that wanted to know what it was, and then another person was apparently on the flight path, and he wanted to know what this big silver thing was that kept going over his house real slow.
That was the.
I was about to start charging a toll. They must have gone over my house 150 times.
Did you tell them it's an airplane?
I told him, I said, I don't know if you saw the article in the newspaper, but it was a scheduled event, and, it's the Ford Tri-Motor, and he says, well, I guess it was a scheduled event.
How many noise complaints do you get? I mean, do you get many at all? We used to track that, but
We still track them. The most we get is when the crop dusters are in the area. We got calls when they were spraying gypsy moth in June, and then we had 2 different crop dusting operations that came in. I don't know if it was July, and they were operating, but the city people are not used to seeing crop dusting airplanes. They think someone's trying to take the roof off. You get a lot. Usually, once you tell them what's going on, and that's it.
In fairness, though, the crop dusting pilots, they do fly differently than most people.
Yeah.
I'll let it go at that.
Yeah, it's amazing when you walk out there and start taking pictures, how they change the patterns again.
yeah, they don't obey any of the rules.
You start taking pictures.
No, I never said that.
Their whole flight pattern changes right around the airfield, trust me.
I started taking pictures, and there was nobody taking off in the middle of the one right over the top of, oh shoot, what's her name? This Wogan's, her house. They were, I mean, right in the center, right above her farm. Susie went out there to tell the camera out, all the way to the end of the runway, going to the pad. It was amazing how much they changed the other camera out there. So, yeah, it was, my phone started ringing that morning at about 5 after 6. And about that time, I'd already seen one just get right, like it's right in front of me on 2 and 3, so.
I was just not used to seeing, numerous aircraft leaving the airport and they were going above 150 feet in altitude and just disappearing in the horizon. So.
It's interesting to watch.
Yeah.
It was fun.
The event got a lot of Facebook comment and some of the local web comments. I think people, again, just general population said, hey, that's really neat, and testified by the number of rides given is excellent. I'm hopeful we can have someone like that come back again and additional. I still remember back, it must have been 15 years ago, we had the kind of the large.
Probably a lot of work for you guys, but it is a neat thing
It
to
is,
have now and then.
but the payoff is, I think, to the community, to the aircraft community, is big, especially the older aircraft. And it's worthwhile that if we can put together another larger event, even if the city has to consider putting some funding towards it, it's a great way to show off our airport, and our 800-foot runway is starting to really pay off with the larger jets coming just to fuel, and just our airport in general. The more notoriety we get through these events like this, we just continue to support aviation. Plus, it was just really, really cool watching that plane fly around over and over again.
It was fun to fly in. Any other comments about the event? Okay, staff comments. I assume that's the two of you.
I have a couple. Starting first with commission members, for this, we're here, I think it was 2 years ago, we had a conversation about asphalt and T hangers, and if you remember correctly, it was that the rates were raised and there was a certain payback, for asphalt or hanger updates or stuff of that nature. You guys would be in favor of that. So I want to thank you guys that were here, because we kind of got this. I mean, we'd already seen the paper security and everything else, but with your comments and help, it probably helped spear these pavement in that direction with T hangers. Knowing we needed it, but every bit of your support helps us do our job also. So I know we had a couple of conversations on that. I think it was back-to-back meetings actually, and I think Dave, you even helped said, if I need to raise my hanger rent $10 going towards that pavement every month or something, that would be helpful. But so thank you guys for helping us help yourselves. And for those of you who have hangers, but it's a hard area just because it's not a taxiway, it's not a runway, something of that nature. But Phil's been very supportive and an advocate, and he's helping the city manager side and city council too. But he has helped with that also. So.
The old guy that was in his job used to, instead of putting it on Strack Road, he'd bring it to the airport.
I'm not going there.
I'm not biting, John.
And then there's one other thing I'd like to bring up. I would like to thank John, Mike, Greg, Jeannie, everybody who helped the RP process. It's definitely time-consuming, but I want to say that it was done in a professional manner. It was kind of fun to be a part of. Mike Spencer is not here tonight. I'd ask him if he would like to appear. And I don't know, you guys know Mike in his flight school. He's a very easygoing, non-confrontational, doesn't want to be in the limelight type person. But actually, the week before this, he was actually at the OPA for his Spencer Aviation. 954 flight schools that were mentioned. Mike ended up ranking in the top 4% for flight schools in the nation. But he was actually awarded a Distinguished Flight School Award from the OPA. 2012, 13, 14, 16, and 17. His pull rating was 100% professionalism and friendly support staff. The reason I'm bringing this up is
wanted Mike to come and talk about it, to be truthful, but those of you that know Mike, he's, I think, the most melancholy person I've ever met. He's not looking for anybody to, pat him on the shoulder or anything else. He did say that he hasn't received his award today when he told me he'll try to make the next commission meeting, but I just thought it was something that everybody should know about. Bill and I had spoke to Lee Yoakum about probably trying to put some on the website and everything else, because it just goes back to show you that, some of the positive things are really going on around Delaware Airport that you don't hear about. And Mike Spencer's not a person that's going to brag about it. That's just his nature. But I thought if everybody knew about that, you might want to congratulate him personally. He's very, very positive and very good person out there. John probably concur with you. John's a good person out there, Phil too. Don't take it from that. I just thought it was something that needs to be brought up. He's not that type of person to brag about himself, and I think it's a great job. It's good to show the place we have to,
Yeah, we are fortunate to have Mike Spencer running the flight school at the airport. He does a great job. Always seeing new faces, wintertime, summertime, whatever. These people coming through to Brandon to take flight instruction, runs a top rate service.
Maybe we give the commission member his award. See if he'll show up. But no, I want to say thanks again to everybody that helped on the RFP. It was a long process, but it was very educational, and I think we did a good job.
Okay, Kevin, anything?
Just one small piece of business. Joe mentioned rates. This is the time of year where we normally would discuss or send out new lease for that T-hanger. My position is, because we're going into the business planning, strategic planning process, a big part of that is looking at our rate structure. That I would propose that we don't change the rates at the end of the year as for the next year lease like we normally would. We let this process vet itself out, and if in that is recommended for rate increases for 2020, then we would initiate them then or catch up then. But instead of trying to come up with an increase that may or may not be close to matching what our experts say, plus having time to review that with you. So if you're all right with that, my recommendation is going to be that we keep the rates where they're at on our T-hangers for the upcoming year.
Do we need to do anything about that, or just make a note of it that it was?
Motion, that's fine.
It wouldn't hurt, I suppose, because it does involve
Do a
money.
motion saying that you support that rates,
Maintain
maintain the current
rates.
rates until
through 2019.
Well, until the conclusion of the study.
Well, we got to enter into lease agreements for the year, so it would be by agreeing, we would be saying these are the rates for 2019, but at least we'll know what new rates might be in 2020.
Are they still 6-month leases or one year?
Half for 6 months, half for 1 year.
Yeah, hangers A, B, and C are 1 year, D, E, and F are 6 months.
Oh, why is there a difference?
I think it had to do with the funding mechanism back when the borrowing and the 233 account, and they remember that whole scenario.
But we still got 10 years or so to pay on the newer ones?
Yeah, I'd say you're probably about 12, right around 10, 12 years.
Someone like that?
I'll move that we maintain the current rates through this coming year or through the next lease cycle at least.
Okay.
Second.
I'm sorry, who seconded? Oh, sorry.
Okay,
Can we take the roll?
We got to do a
Roll
roll call for that.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Mr. Gobb?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Councilman Rohr?
Yes.
And Vice Chairwoman McIntyre?
yes,
Madam Chair,
yes,
I don't know if in the beginning we talked about public comment, if we wanted to receive any
okay,
before adjournment.
okay, back to any public comments?
I think Rich had some on the,
All my interests have been addressed.
Okay, great.
Very good. Anyone else? No?
All right.
Okay. Member comments. Now's your chance.
again, I would thank Kevin and Joe for the Tri-Motor buy-in and everything else they do out there, and Bill for your taking such a leadership role in getting this maintenance thing taken care of and fairly expeditiously.
I will have to say on the Tri-Motor, the EAA chapter Bernie, they did everything. We were just there to kind of give support, and then the Tri-Motor people, they had that all figured out, how they set it up, how they register people, and we pretty much just made sure that everything went smooth, and like the typical open house event where you have several things going on, really went smooth. The EAA chapter did a fine job, and the Tri-Motor people, they did a great job, made it really easy for us.
I think Bernie worked really hard on it also.
Yeah,
I think he was very advantageous to run around and everything. I know he was pretty excited about it. So I mean, I would say that they probably deserve more kudos and thank you.
How about-
I would add, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I would just add my thanks too. I got to do one of, of the Sunday rides, and it was a great time. So
Yeah.
thanks a lot.
It was nice.
It's a good event. It's really neat.
Well, I enjoyed it as well, and everyone that was there that day that I was there they were all excited about doing it, and I was fortunate enough to be able to fly for a little bit, so I really enjoyed it. But the pilot did mention to me that they were really impressed with the way things were run, and how organized it was, and were pleasantly surprised at the number of people, even with the weather that was not, favorable. A lot of days, I know the day we were up, there was a big not a thunderstorm, but a big rain shower pretty much right over the city of Delaware. And, they were still up there. There was plenty of clear space otherwise, but you could clearly see that rain cell there. So that was kind of interesting for people to be up, to see that. So
That thing probably leaks too.
yes.
I don't think they
Yeah.
fly through it.
But we didn't fly through it. No, we didn't. But it was very evident that it was there. So, how about Jug Day, Kevin? Was there?
Actually, this was one of our busier ones. I think we had a total of 10 jets that day. 2 of them were unrelated, and at one time I think we had 8 on the ramp at one time. I don't really remember what the fuel sales were. Sometimes just because you got jets on the ramp don't mean you're selling any fuel, but it was a good day. Better than probably the past 4 or 5 years.
Great. And why do you think that is? Just the nature of who was racing or something?
My personal opinion, but I think it's the economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a beautiful day. Okay. Any other member comments? No? Okay, last chance for public comment. All right, a motion to adjourn.
I'll move, we adjourn.
I'll second.
There was a tie for second.
Oh, no, you're good.
We're adjourned, 8:23.
Okay.
We're not here till 2 a.m.